Good here.
Okay, so what I thought was it would be a good idea for people who are not familiar with IIKDS and the university to hear a little bit about it from your background as to what is what is the mission behind it. We have Renee on with us.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Going well. How about you?
Good, good.
I can't see. Let me put my glasses on.
That's okay. Renee, you're probably the veteran of this, so, so you can go through pointers here. Um, so I thought it would be a great thing to start off by sharing with viewers what ICASE is about and what the mission of the university and the society is.
Okay, so that's a good question. So the mission of IIKDS is to preserve the cultural continuity of African traditional sciences here in America. So our goal is to create a platform that will provide a structured path for people to study traditional medicine. The traditional medicine that we're talking about here is called Timbukata. Tim or Tima. Tim means traditional medicine, and Bukata means the world, soul, and the spirit powers of the earth. So our goal here is to provide a platform where we could bring rare indigenous knowledge, such as the knowledge that comes from the northern regions of Ghana, the Dagomba people from the kingdom of Dagbang, in addition to many other Aboriginal types of indigenous spiritual perspectives. Our goal here is to bring this information to create a structured platform where people could learn and study and get this valuable information, because unfortunately it's very difficult to get this type of information anywhere in the diaspora. So our goal here is to provide a platform where people can feel comfortable, they can feel like they're at home, and they can get real, authentic spiritual knowledge.
Okay, wonderful. Uh, Pete, if I could just ask you to perhaps adjust your mic a little bit more. Yes, so that we can get to see you full front and center. Welcome. We've got another guest on the line with us. So, so in addition to the society, the International Indigenous Knowledge and Development Society, would you mind sharing a little bit of background about that? Because obviously it's not something that is just new that you're doing, you're developing, this has been going on for quite some time. Could you give a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, so the Indigenous Knowledge and Development Society, the International Indigenous Knowledge Development Society, it started off with a group by the name of IKS, Indigenous Knowledge Studies. This was something that we first launched, myself and an elder by the name of Apeto, who is now actually transitioned. We actually introduced the concept of IKS about 5 years ago with a goal to actually bring traditional knowledge to people here in the States, in America, and throughout the diaspora. One of the things that we were doing at first is that we were actually taking groups of people over to the northern regions of Ghana, to Burkina Faso, and we were doing long extended stays, maybe 30 days, even longer, where we're taking groups of people, up to even 24 people a group. However, one of the things that we noticed is that a lot of people did not have the time to spend 2 weeks, in the bush with us, in some of these places. So the goal here was then to provide a platform where we could actually bring the knowledge, the elders, the history, and the culture. We could actually bring it to people here in America. So therefore, then we structured the Indigenous Knowledge Studies, which was the very first platform that we had, where we would do different interviews. We would interview different elders and so forth, and we would provide that information. We would make it public so that people could see it, in addition to creating different spiritual remedies, um, and spiritual tools and supplies and so forth, for people. So our goal then was to make sure that we had a system in place that anything that anyone needed spiritually, we had something that we could help them, we could provide them with those remedies and with those supplements and products and so forth. So that's essentially how it first got started, and then from there, it began to evolve as we began to incorporate other elders, and our society and our movement gained traction, we were able to collaborate with a lot of different spiritual clans throughout the northern regions of Ghana that were interested in resurrecting the traditions of Timbuktu here in America for the relatives that exist within the diaspora. Um, so I tell the story quite often, but this started because I received a charge from a group of elders as I was studying in a small village in Tamale called Koko. I was met there by the chief of the village, in addition to his court of elders. So I had to sit in front of these elders, and one of the things that they asked me, there's about 11 different elders that were sitting in front of me, and in back of these elders sat the chief, and the chief was piercing from behind the elders, and he asked me, he said, why is it that you are the first African American to come here and to study in our village? And he said, where are the rest of your brothers and sisters? He even further, he went on to ask, are our relatives, are they ashamed of us? Why do they not want to come home? And I had to explain the cultural dynamics that existed here in the States, and the reason why, as far as the cultural identity, a lot of African Americans did not identify themselves as having a connection to their relatives in Africa. So one of the charges that was given to me, because at that time, this was at the beginning of the start of it all, I actually wanted to study with an elder by the name of Apetor, who later on became known as Buaru, which is the chief of the warriors from the royal family of Dagbang. I wanted to study with him, but this chief of this village stipulated that, look, if you want to continue your studies with Apeto, you're going to have to agree to take this knowledge and this information and give it to our brothers and sisters that are not going to find their way back home. So from that moment, I took on that charge, and I accepted that responsibility. Even though at that point, I could honestly say I didn't really understand the extent of what I was what I was promising. However, as time went on, I began to realize, as I took on that promise, one of the things it said is that, now our guides will follow you, and they will help you to bring this knowledge and this information to the brothers and sisters, in America and throughout the diaspora. And this is how it all got started. And from that point on, everything that I did was centered around bringing the tradition and bringing the knowledge to people here in America and throughout the diaspora. Right.
Wonderful. So, did anybody have any questions, or guests have any questions for Chief Machi?
So you guys
I
can
do have a question.
go ahead.
um, Chief Amachi, can you talk about, you mentioned the diaspora a lot for those people who may not understand what that means. Can you tell us what that means when you say it?
So when I say the diaspora, I'm talking about the different countries and so forth that exist. I'm talking about the countries that exist outside of the parameters of Africa. So I'm talking about the family structure that exists both locally on the continent of Africa and then throughout the diaspora, meaning the exterior countries and landmasses and so forth that are in the surroundings. So when I'm talking about the diaspora, I'm talking about not only North America, but I'm talking about South America, and I'm talking about other landmasses as well. Mhm.
Okay.
So,
Chief Amachi, actually, I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you started your studies, like how long did it take for you to get to where you are now?
It took me about almost 15 years. I was studying with the Peto for over 5 years before I eventually became his what we call Wulana, which was his apprentice. So it took me quite some time. So this wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a very slow process. And what happened was the process essentially started with me becoming the student or the apprentice of a Petar. Um, and as I became his apprentice, he took me, what the traditional word is called wulana. Um, he took me through several different schools and several different clans. So as time went on, he would introduce me to clan after clan, and he would introduce me to the spirits of the clan. So I was moved through the clans of what we call the Jinwara or the Jinwaraba, which means the Queen of Witches, which these are a group of traditional healers, but also act as a type of traditional structure of a spiritual police. So the Jinwara are known, they're the only society that is openly allowed to, within the Dagomba culture, classify themselves as a witch. And let me explain what I mean. That they're known as the Queen of Witches, but the title means like someone who remedies disagreeable actions of a witch. So in that type of traditional setting, a witch would be someone who's considered to use the spiritual powers that they have in order to harm. That's what a person is labeled as a witch. So in that society, in the kingdom of Dagbang, the title of a witch isn't necessarily an agreeable term. It's a term that means that someone is using the powers in order to harm. So you have clans such as the Jinwara or the Jinwara, which police an area. Which that means is that there are certain spirits, such as with the Paparaga, the dwarfs, and what we call Alazini or Zini, like the genie or the jinn, that actually will alert a person, such as myself or another jinn waraba, which if there's someone that is using their powers spiritually in order to harm people, then those spirits will come and will alert the individual, and with the powers of those spirits, a person could actually become disarmed. So those spirits could be sent to a person in order to actually take away their power. So there's clans such as the Jinwaraba, then there's clans such as the clans of the snake gods, the clans of the river gods, the Bukbihi. There's a lot of different clans, the clans of Tembo, the clans of Mantambo. These are different clans and different structures that I had to go through in order to become proficient in each one of those different clans. And each one of those different clans have different spirits that they're working with and have different specialties. So it took me a while to travel through these different schools, becoming what we call a Tinbihi at first, which a Tinbihi means one who is a caretaker of the shrine. It means a child of the land. Tenbihi. Then you have Tindana. Tindana, it means then one who collects the spiritual medicine. See, at first, when you first come in, you collect different shrines and different fetishes and different materials and so forth. And when that's done, you become a caretaker of those shrines. But as time moves on, then you actually get to learn how those shrines are actually created, and then you actually learn different aspects of the medicine. So that's what we call a Tindana. A Tindana. It means one who collects the medicine, or it means a landlord of the spirits and the herbalists. But then you can move from there also to what we call a bulana. A buglana, it means like the controller of the gods. So these are different titles that I received and that I had to go through. I had to go through different stages in each one of these different clans in order to learn um, the ways of what we call the inyaba, the ways of the grandfather. I had to learn these things. So it took some time. But still, one of the things that I would attribute is that I was very fortunate. I tell people all the time, and this is one of the reasons why we have the ancestral class. That's so important. It was this ancestral connection that I made that made all of these things possible. So it was when I started calling on my grandmother, and I started calling on my grandfather, I started to see different things and different coincidences, so-called coincidences, begin to manifest. And literally a month or so later, I found myself that I was in Africa. I was in the northern regions of Ghana. And then sometime as I sat in front of some diviners and different people, what we call baga. Baga, it means like a soothsayer or a diviner. It was told to me that I was really meant to come there in order to retrieve an artifact that had already been in my family line through my mother's side. My grandfather on my mother's side was actually holding a particular spirit that it was responsible for me to get and to bring back to America. So that's kind of how it started for me.
I think that That's interesting because I was reading in the Chicago Tribune about the witches in the countries of Africa and northern Ghana. And I was thinking that they were thinking that was a bad thing. So I'm glad that you actually brought out that it's a difference between the witches who are doing harm and then witches who are actually kind of ordained by the priests to do what they're supposed to do. And then I had one other question. A lot of people in America or they're familiar with Yoruba, the Yoruban religions, and also Vodun. How does what you do compare to that?
Well, and that's another thing, and I like to talk to people. People sometimes don't like to have this conversation because it gets into like a historical aspect of West Africa. But most people are familiar with the structures of African spirituality now based on the dynamics that exist now. They really aren't looking at the historical context of how these different traditions have been formulated, within West Africa. And the truth is that a lot of these traditional or postmodern African religions that you see today, they did not exist in some of those places in ancient history. So let me give you an example. One of the reasons why Timbuktu, which is the tradition of Dagbang, is so relevant to brothers and sisters here in America today is because the Dagombas, the Masi, the Mindi, and so forth have a lot of intercultural relationships to not only the Moors that have talked about a lot within, the quote unquote conscious community, but also they have connection to the Aboriginal population that's here in America through what they call the Shi Amaru, or what is also known as the Shi Omex. So the Shi Omex and the Mindis, the Masi and the Dagomba, have a connection. So if you look at the totemic structure, you'll see that it's extremely similar. But the Dagombas also are connected to the Old Kingdom of Ghana, which the Old Kingdom of Ghana is the first of the three major West African empires. So when understanding traditional African or contemporary African religion, we have to look at the structure of the empires that existed in West Africa and see exactly how they exist today versus how they existed in the past. And the three major West Africa kingdoms are the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, and then the Songhai Empire. Now, most people are familiar with the Mali Empire, through Musa Mankankan Musa. I believe that's his name, and they're familiar with him, strictly because, in my opinion, he was the first to accept Islam as a major leader, and then the Western world then began to write about him. But before then, you had the Old Kingdom of Ghana, which was actually the oldest and was the largest kingdom of all of those kingdoms. So when most people are familiar with the riches and the gold of the Mali Empire and then the Songhai Empire, they're not very familiar with the history of the Old Kingdom of Ghana. And the Old Kingdom of Ghana lasted for, even according to temporary estimates, it lasted for over 1,000 years. From according to what most contemporary historians say, from the year 240 all the way to 1240. And it was after that fall that rose up the Mali Empire. So when you hear about the gold kings coming from Mali, you hear about Mutsa and those different Mindi people traveling, and they talk about them traveling to the Americas and all their gold and so forth and all their wealth that they had. Well, it was the Old Kingdom of Ghana where they got that. And you have clans such as the Dagombas, which were actually the warriors and were the caretakers of a lot of different secrets, a lot of secrets that existed there, because they were in fact what you call the descendants of the Nabihi. The Nabihi, or the Neb or Nab, were the same masters that traveled out of the Eastern Sahara. Because of the colonialism and so forth that was happening there in North Africa, they began to migrate down from the Eastern Sahara over to the Western Sahara, West Africa, and they formulated a lot of the old Kingdom of Ghana. So the Old Kingdom of Ghana, Masi, all those people are responsible for really shaping the very beginning or the foundation of a lot of the traditions that you have in those areas. And the reason why that is because a lot of the traditions that you have now, they're being kept going by certain clans, certain temples, certain family members. These are certain family clans that have been traveling and that have been keeping certain traditions. If you look at things like Yoruba and so forth, the Yorubas were not even in Nigeria around that time. Around 2 AD or so forth, they weren't in Nigeria at that time. The Yorubas don't come, I believe, until like the eighth, ninth, or 10th, maybe even the 12th century. They didn't get over into Nigeria. So a lot of people are familiar with these structures, but they don't understand that there were other structures that were in place. So you had clans such as the Masi, which, if you look at the destruction of black civilization by Chancellor Williams, he describes the Masi as being some of the greatest warriors in African history on horseback. The Masi were actually Dagombas. The Masi and Dagombas are one and the same. So the history there, and the Masi, their language is actually called Moray, the Moorish language. So if you look at the Alavids and a lot of the pictures that you see of the old Spanish Moors and so forth that were standing there in Spain, they were coming in from the Alavids. But the Alavids and so forth were different people that actually came into the old kingdom of Ghana, and there was a lot of people from those cultures that were actually there. So the reason why it's important for people to know more about Timbuktu is because Timbuktu and those traditions of the Dagombas are actually the old traditions that are coming out of Egypt, that are coming out of the old kingdom of Ghana, that were coming out of places like Timbuktu, because most people are familiar with the concept of Timbuktu. Okay, however, they don't realize that Timbuktu was actually created by the old kingdom of Ghana. It was not created by the old Mali Empire. So when you have the Timbuktu, you realize that they have protectors. They had a whole society that was responsible as their protectors. The same way you have people in Jerusalem, these Knights of Templar and so forth, that were claiming that they were the protectors of the secrets in Jerusalem. You also had that same thing that existed in Timbuktu. And Timbuktu, they were the Dagombas. The Dagombas were one of the many clans, but the Dagombas were the clan and one of the most fierce clans of warriors, spiritual warriors. And this is why we practice the same thing today. It's called Tim Mbukata, Timbuktu, Tim Mbukata. It's the same thing. That is the knowledge that's coming out of Timbuktu, and it is the same knowledge that's coming out of ancient Egypt. These were the traditions that were carried down by the Nabihi, or the Nabihi are known as the royals. In ancient Egypt, they were known as the Neb, or the Nebi, and this is why the Dagombas now are, in the traditional structure of the royalty and the hierarchy, they're known as Naba, Naba, or Ba Naba. So the reason why it's so relevant for people to understand the traditions of Timbuktu is because the truth is that Timbuktu and a lot of the spiritual structures that were placed during these first empires influenced the very dynamics of what you see as far as traditional African spirituality now. People have to understand that the historical context of the different empires, from the Mali Empire that lasted for only a couple hundred years, to the Ghana Empire that lasted literally thousands of years and was a traditional society. And that is the reason why we don't hear about them, because they had their sacred force, they had their different traditional concepts. Do you understand? And they were traditionalists, even though they practiced somewhat a type of tolerance in the old kingdom of Ghana, and which proved to be a downfall as they began to let some people that practice different monotheistic religions to come in, and that's eventually when the Alavids came in and eventually took over that area. But I want to refer people to a lot of things that you see in the Golden Age of the Moors by Ivan van Sertima and so forth, and they're showing Alavids there, and those are the black Moors that they show in Spain. But what I'm telling you is, a lot of them are still wearing the traditional dress. If you look very closely at the picture, they're holding kabri, which are traditional tools of the Dagomba. So the Dagomba and Timbuktu are intricately related to a lot of the culture that a lot of us here in America, especially African Americans, are tied to, whether it's the Moorish information about the Moors, or even if it's the information coming out of ancient Egypt. And one thing that I will say about the Moorish concept, the Masi. The Masi were we can move forward. But if you get a chance to study some of these groups, you'll see that they have a pivotal role in our lost history that a lot of us don't know about, simply because we don't understand the history and the structure of West Africa.
I think that that's interesting because they would have us to believe that all the Moors were destroyed when they were driven out of Spain. So I think that is interesting. Also, I think that is also interesting that if you look at those pre-colonial maps of Africa, you'll see the kingdom of Dagbon right above where Ghana is now. It was
Hmm.
like a strip, and so it seems like there's, even though they put new borders up, there's the kingdom still exists.
Yes. Yes, the kingdom of Dagbang, the Wadugu, the Suniki, the Mindi, the Masi, these were all one group that came together to create the Masi. But these groups and these clans are responsible for a revolutionary structure that was held in West Africa, especially with the Masis, where the law was that they said that no foreigner could actually settle in their land, and that the day that a foreigner does settle in their land, that would be the day that they fall. So the Masi, according to the legend, didn't fall into the 20th century. So in there, they had a very strict campaign that they propagated all over the land, talking about the natural law. But it wasn't a natural law that most people see now and they hear about in any type of pseudo-Moorish doctrine. The natural law that they were describing was Timbuktu, and they saw themselves as reflections of the gods themselves. So they actually went around a lot of West Africa, instituting traditional shrines and teachings and so forth, teaching on the importance of the indigenous inhabitants of the land and their connection to what we call the Wu Nonam, the gods of the land. And it was those that participated in that practice, they became known as the resurrection of God, of the Wu Nonam on earth. And this was something that the Masi and the Dagombas practiced. They saw themselves as Nam, or they saw themselves as resurrection of the gods, and it was because that they practiced what they called the natural law. But that natural law was the law of tradition, the law of the land, and understanding the components of what we call the Wu Nonam, the gods of the ancestors that exist in the land. So once again, this was a Moorish doctrine. But I want to be clear, this has absolutely nothing to do with what most people are calling Moors today, according to the structure that a lot of them have it. I'm talking about something that goes way beyond that, because a lot of these people that are claiming these practices now, they're really practicing reflections of Islam and everything else, when that's something that's more along the lines of what Musa, Kankan Musa, was practicing in the Mali Empire. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of the people that were in the old Ghana Empire and so forth like that, you have to understand, if you look at Timbuktu, this is a kind of a historical thing. If you look at Timbuktu, Timbuktu was actually burnt down to the ground by the Masis. Because after the Masis and so forth, and the Wadugu and so forth were kicked out because they did not want to convert to Islam. They began to migrate. So they began to migrate further down. This is why they were in the current land where you call Ghana now. And that's why Ghana is a word, it means warrior kings. That's why it was given the name Ghana, because the warrior kings were people like the Dagbang and so forth that conquered all throughout Mali, conquered the Dogon, conquered all of those places were conquered by the the Dagbang, the Wadugu, the Saniki, the Mendi, and so forth. So there's a lot of rich history that exists in the traditions of Dagbang, and the thing is that it is the actual history and the actual culture that a lot of people have been seeking for, which are the secrets of ancient Egypt and the secrets of the Kemetic philosophy, not just as they exist in modern Egypt, but as they also exist in Sudan, Uganda, Ethiopia, and even beyond. This is the traditional knowledge, which we call Timbuktu, which means traditional medicine in the world, soul, and the spirit powers of the earth. Yeah, I know that was a long, winded, answer, but that's the reason why it's so important, because this is a lot of lost knowledge. Everybody now is focused on ancient Egypt. Everybody now is focused on what they're calling the Moors. They're focused on all these different concepts, but they don't realize that there's actual people that still exist that are the legacies of that. And the Dagombas are one. The Dagombas are one. The Soniki are one. The Masis are some. a lot of these clans are unfortunately, most of the thing that most of the information that we're getting and that we hear about a lot of these clans and a lot of these things, they're under the auspices of the religion of Islam. And the reason why that is because those that accepted or that converted to Islam then uh, then became a part of the Western world, because the Western world wasn't really recording a lot of the things that we were doing when we were strictly dealing with tradition and we're dealing with our indigenous practices. The second we started to accept alien concepts or foreign monotheistic concepts that came from, Sharqi Aussit or Saudi Arabia or all these other places, then the world, the Western world at large, then began to start recording the progress, and hence this is the reason why you only hear the Mali Empire, which was, like I said, an empire that only lasted for about a couple hundred years. When you had the Ghana Empire that lasted for over 1,000 years and even more. Contemporary historians even describe that the old kingdom of Ghana and the dynastic kingdoms were actually running in accords, and they actually say the old kingdom of Ghana was actually an extension of Egypt itself. It was the Western Saharan extension of the Sahara. So this is some very important information that's been lost, and people that are just stuck within the structure of the religion as it exists now in West Africa without understanding the three major West African empires that shaped all of West Africa. They have to look into that knowledge. They have to understand the old kingdom of Ghana, the Mali Empire, and then the Songhai Empire.
I think that that's why it's so important that you bring this to the people here in America, because most of us here don't study, and we don't know what's really going on with regard to the history of Africa. And that's one of the things that you teach about why that is so important for us, why what you're teaching, the Timbuktu. I never even put together the Timbuktu thing. As many times as I've heard that, I never put it together.
Right. Yeah. The Timbuktu and those different societies, and those educational centers, that is the same as Tim and Bukata. You have Tim and Bukata and Timbukata and Timbuktu. It's the same. It's one and the same. And the teachings and the knowledge that was there were one and the same. Even though there's a lot of different subject matters and so forth that were taught there. That was something that was created by the old kingdom of Ghana, and it was structured by the traditionalist perspectives. That's the most important. It wasn't until later that you see, whenever you see something dealing with Timbuktu, they try to now pair it with the monotheistic practices of Islam. But that was not until that the colonial invaders and so forth, such as the Alavids and other people that were really, in essence, North Africans that actually converted to Islam, started to come down into those areas. And then that's when you see that influence there. But before then, it was purely traditional. Yeah, it was purely traditional, and that's the piece that a lot of people are missing, and that is the teachings of Tim and Bukata. It's the same concepts that were kept by what we call the Inyaba, which are the grandfathers, and the way of the grandmothers. This was the teachings that came in and that was instituted in places such as that.
So, so Chief, as you speak of the teachings of Timamukata and the wonderful history that that just gave me a lot of understanding about how this works. Bringing it home a little bit, what are those teachings? How are those teachings more or less relevant to us here in the diaspora, us here in these modern times, and especially to our brothers and sisters who are searching for a way to reconnect with the traditional practices?
Yeah, that's a good question. The reason why it's relevant is because those teachings are teachings that are centered around nature identity.
Mm.
And nature identity is something that's going to be a extremely important concept for brothers and sisters here in the West to understand, simply based on the fact that identity, according to traditional knowledge is very important. I think that a lot of people that are in the diaspora and that are in the United States now, we're still in the phase of reclamation, meaning that we're still in the phase of reclaiming who we are, what we are, and
Mm.
so forth. And we're still dealing with the fundamental concepts of cultural and racial identity, let alone the concepts that were taught in those schools, which is something beyond cultural, racial, or tribal or ethnic identity. It extends to nature identity, and nature identity is the fundamental principle of Timbukata. It's being able to understand your identity, not just your personal identity, but your transpersonal identity, your identity that exists in nature. And in doing so, according to the teachings of the Nyaba, which are the grandfathers and the grandmothers, the ancient grandfathers, it teaches that through the concepts of nature identity, one is then able to resurrect themselves back into the gods themselves, because nature identity then begins to associate you with the qualities, the attributes, the characteristics, the traits, and so forth that exist in nature that have been called magical, that have been called supernatural, that have been given a lot of these different titles, and so forth throughout history, through many different cultures. So what's special about Timbukata is not a structured system that's based on a pantheon of particular gods. It's a particular system that is based on the concepts of traditional medicine, roots, herbs, magic, dealing with the natural elements or organic aspects of nature, that you're able to understand this knowledge to thereby then resurrect yourself back in to the gods by the attributes, by the very attributes, the very concepts, the characteristics and the traits and so forth that give life and give character to so many different aspects of the ecosystem, of different biomes, of ecology itself. So that is one of the prime differences that you may find and what's practiced as Timbukata. It's more of a science that's meant to develop you spiritually. In addition, it's a science that's meant to give you the ability to resurrect yourself back into those divine powers through your actions and through the things that you hold based on your relationship that you have with the different components, the minds and mentalities and so forth, that exist in nature. So it's a fascinating concept, and it's a concept that may be a little bit different than what most people are used to. I think what we have to understand is just because something is an indigenous practice that exists in Africa doesn't mean that it's the same. And one of the things people have to understand is that you have different degrees of operation that exists within certain traditional practices. You have certain traditional practices that are structured along the lines of reverence, and then you have certain traditional practices that are structured more along the lines of operative practices. And that is definitely something that Timbukata is. It's based off the science of traditional roots, herbs, and so forth, in order to tap into the Bukata, which is the spiritual protection or world soul, spirit powers of the earth. So it's a tradition that brings people back into the real connection with nature. And that's what a lot of these esoteric scientists, sciences, and occult information nowadays. You see, everything is about reconnecting to nature. Well, Timbukata and these sciences are based on that. It's based on our natural identity, understanding concepts such as what we call the Noliwuni, or the star, which is the spiritual component of a person that both exists in themselves, but then also exists in various aspects of nature. And then even so far, by understanding that concept, in the traditions, understanding the star or the Noliwuni, with this knowledge and understanding the concepts of geography, understanding the land, understanding the lay of the land, understanding exactly where a person's family powers or family characteristics come from. And this is where we talk about the Noliwuni. A lot of us have seen, traditionally, we see psychic powers. We see supernatural things that exist in human beings. We see it as something that is an individual type of phenomena. But in the traditions of Timbukata, um, the characteristics and the personality traits and the attributes that have been labeled as supernatural or psychic are then are then attributes and concepts that are then connected to the very aspects of the land. And they're connected to the landscape. They're connected to the life forms and so forth that exist within the environment. So it's through this type of knowledge that we know that we're able to collect those attributes and those qualities and actually add them to ourselves in order to gain these characteristics. There are many clans that have existed, and there's stories within the traditions of Dagbang of clans that literally existed that were responsible for resurrecting the gods. It's where you had flesh and blood women that would practice aspects of Timbukata and would travel to certain locations with people that are known as Tindanana and Bulanana in order to actually cultivate that star, that spiritual component of a person. And in doing so, they resurrected children that had specific abilities, that had specific traits that were known as supernatural, and so forth. And a lot of these stories from a lot of these different clans, have been seen and then been reflected in a lot of different cultures. So you have cultures such as in ancient Egypt when you see Khnum. And you see Khnum sitting at the potter's wheel, and a lot of these people are looking at that, and they're saying that, oh, it means that he's the creator, or he means this, he means that. But what that's really dealing with is those are different clans of the Nabi, the Nabihi, that are traveling out there that have the actual science of how to mold a man from the clay, but in order to mold a god, in order to mold what we call a Nawuni. Do you understand that? But this is why the knowledge of the land. This is by the knowledge of the land, and this is why they show Khnum sitting there at the potter's wheel. And what's really being showed there, these are the clans of the Noliwuni. These are the clans of the Noliwuni that knew how to shift or mold or to fashion what is also known as the Ba, which is known as the Ba in ancient Egypt, which the Ba is known as what? The soul. But that's the same thing that exists in Tim and Bukata. It's the soul. So that same type of aspect that they had there still exists in those clans today, and names and titles have changed. However, that information still exists, and it's still the same. So yeah, so you have to stop me before I go on some.
That's okay. So we don't want to
I
stop you
lost
when you
my thought
start
for a
when you
second.
start bring the deep stuff here. But I just want to speak to some of the things that we're doing. Have you speak to some of the things that we're doing in order for people to get some training and some insight into some of these into some of this knowledge system here. So can you speak to what are some of the things that we're putting together, that we're putting out together to be able to help people to kind of start to dive down this rabbit hole, so to speak, and start to resurrect back into the gods of our ancestors.
Right. So one of the things that we're doing is at IIKDS is that we have a structured educational path. One of the things that we have is we have a master's program, which is a graduate studies program, which is a year-long program. It's actually a year and a quarter long program where we're training people to have practitioner level knowledge, where we're taking them through a year-long program where they're actually able to learn different components of history. They're able to learn different components of diagnostic methodology, such as different divining methods and so forth. There's different fetishes, spiritual tools, shrines, and so forth that are constructed, and the knowledge centered around the different methodologies with these different fetishes and shrines and spiritual tools and so forth. So we have programs such as that. We have programs that we're going to start introducing in the next few weeks, which is the diviners apprenticeship program, where it's going to be a 7-step course, but we're teaching people the various aspects of what we call the baga, which the baga, it means like a diviner or soothsayer. So we're taking people through the knowledge of those schools and teaching people different diagnostic methods. Starting off from the very beginning, traveling all the way to the more advanced. As they graduate one course, then they're able to move to other courses, which are then taken care of through the International Association of Traditional Scientists. So then we have an association that exists in West Africa that's there, that's also here to provide support to the students. So, classes that advance from that are actually participating within the association, and then there are different elders and so forth that specialize in different aspects of divining, what we call baga, that are actually training, these students. We also have, some of the preliminary classes that we're teaching now, such as the Dream Warriors course, which gets into some very fascinating aspects, some fundamental principles that need to be observed in order to move forward in the traditional practices. We also have the ancestral course that we're also teaching, the ancestral consciousness course that we're teaching, where we're creating different ancestral shrines and so forth. But one of the things that we're focused on, at this university, is that we want to put forth a hands-on method. So it's not just something that's done through the computer. All the courses, there are different materials and so forth that are sent to students, or they have hands-on, experience. And that's one of the things that we try to, pride ourselves on at IIKDS is that we want to provide students with experience, not just a bunch of talk and a bunch of lecturing, but we want to provide students with actual experiences, actual phenomena, so that they can actually experience what traditional knowledge is and experience it from a hands-on basis, where they can actually experience it. So this is where you have things like the Dream Warriors course and so forth, where we're taking people in, they're going through certain initiations and they're getting certain medicines and so forth that they're using in order to help them to get guidance and so forth in their dreams, and the ancestral course and so forth. So there's a lot of courses, that we're coming out with now that people really need to start paying attention to. In addition, we even have something that we're coming out in about a month or so. We have a spiritual development course, which is a course that specifically ran through the International Association for Traditional Sciences. So this is a course that's designed around developing a person spiritually, whether it's dealing with their insight, whether it's dealing with their physical protection, whether it's dealing with their ability to influence, whether it's dealing with so many various aspects around spiritual development. Each month there are different products, there's different teachings, there are different knowledge and so forth that are given to the students from legitimate indigenous spiritual teachers that exist, you know, in the continent of Africa, in West Africa, which is so important because a lot of us don't realize that in order to get this knowledge, you got to purchase a plane ticket. First of all, you have to get a legitimate connection, first of all, of someone who's really going to help
That's
you
what, that's,
with that, right?
yes, that's.
Uh,
I was going to say that's what I think is most fascinating about this, chief, is that, I mean, I've had the experience, and I don't know about about the others, but I've had the experience where you had to travel, and you had to take time off from work, and you had to be, in a space and time, for a couple of weeks at a time, or several days at a time, in order to be able to get some of this download, and in order to be able to get some of these teachings. And what I find fascinating about the university is that we're actually using, this is really what science is about, right? So we're using modern science to teach traditional medicine. Isn't that fascinating? So we're using a combination of of internet, of live broadcasts like this, phone, as well as you said, it spoke to the actual hands-on things that people actually do. So I find it so fascinating that we're able to do this, and to bring that to a level where people can tap into it from wherever they are and be able to grow and learn. Versus, I mean, yes, of course, we want to take off. We want to take off to the continent, which I want to do, and definitely we'll talk about that. That trip coming up in September. But I really value what appears to be, kind of like a model for being able to bring traditional teaching, bringing the elders to us, bringing bringing your medicine and your gift to us. So I just wanted to just speak to the fact that I think that if people are really looking for a way to connect to traditional teaching and feeling as if they don't have anything close in their proximity, because I hear this all the time. Like, is something happening in my area? Is something happening in my area? Something happening in my area? Well, if you've got an internet connection, something is happening in your area, right? So I think this is really
Exactly.
good for people to know that you can tap into it from wherever you are. And this is a really, really beautiful thing about the university, that these teachings can be brought to people. And so there's absolutely just like no excuse to sit around and say I don't know, or I can't, or I don't have access, because the access is right at the tip of your fingers.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and then that's the benefit of it. And that's one of the reasons why um, we've been working so hard to get this to the people, because these type of opportunities to sit in front of elders um, this magnitude is just it's unheard of. So we wanted to be the first to do such a thing, and to create a structure and create a space where people can come and can learn from various different specialties, not just one specialty, but a lot of different specialties. People have the ability to come in and to learn it to where they can become self-sufficient, which is going to be important, because a lot of people have only learned how to become dependent. So now we're running into an era where being self-sufficient and having the know-how is going to be important. Particularly for saving, our families, as far as understanding, the hidden cultural continuity that exists between, our traditional practices that we practice in a lot of these indigenous environments, and then, what we practice now. So it's going to be extremely important for for there to be platforms such as this in order to teach this information. And this is the reason why we like what you said. I believe we have the trip in September, late September, that we're planning on taking a select group to West Africa to participate in some of the programs that we have there. So we have a lot of different programs that we plan on providing.
I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you, Chief, but there's an invite. There's someone requesting an invite to join on the panel. So if you would check your inbox, your email, and see if you could add another guest to the chat here.
Let me see here. Give me 1 second. Guys, give me 1 second. Give me 1 second, please.
So while just getting that done, I just wanted to ask you guys on the panel, what have you found about what he's sharing and about the experience with the university? If there's anything that you'd like to share about that.
Yeah, absolutely. From a historical perspective, I mean, the things that he mentioned were just phenomenal. A lot of things that I did not know the connection of a lot of the things that he talked about. But as it relates to some of the courses that I've taken, which I've only taken one, I'm in the process of taking the Ancestors course, and it's just been a phenomenal course. It's one of the best experiences that I've had as it relates to being connected to my ancestors and being connected to an indigenous practice, and actually learning like the in-depth knowledge of ancestral connection has been just so helpful and just profound for me.
And I would agree with you, because it's almost like living a different kind of life. One of the things that Chief Amachi was saying is that we're so used to being dependent
Mm-hmm.
And as he was talking, the things that I was thinking about were words that we're used to, like worship and punishment and life after death, and that's just what we're. But this is not even really this is not religion. This is a system. This is a way of life.
Mm-hmm.
This is nature. This is something totally, completely different. So it's going to actually take something that a word that I use a lot, a paradigm shift for a lot of people. I mean, and a lot of us, we were already just like acting as eclectic individuals, doing our own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Solitary practitioners looking for stuff and then not really finding it because we were the only thing we had was voodoo and hoodoo. But then we knew there was something, and now we've got this. And to me, and I'm as a Dream Warrior student and also currently in the ancestral class, to me this is the authentic one, because how many people have been searching YouTube looking for books, third hand information from people who are not African, and then just trying to put it together, and everybody's got their own little thing that they're doing. But now we've got like an authentic connection that is not only a connection, but it's a powerful one. And so we have an opportunity to have change and to see benefits. And that's one of the things that I love most about it.
I'm glad that you talked about that, about the hoodoo and you know uh, many of those different arts, that many of them are classified as traditional African folk magic, hoodoo, and so forth. And what I want to introduce to people is that those practices such as hoodoo and so forth, that are focused on more of the operative aspect of traditional practice. This is the very core of what Timbukata is, and the cultural connection that exists between a lot of the practices that are practiced now, such as hoodoo and such as voodoo and so forth. They all have a place within the structure of Timbukata, because Timbukata are the mother and father of a lot of these traditional practices that are practiced throughout the diaspora, in the West Indies, in South America, and a lot of these different places. Timbukata is the mother and father of a lot of those different practices. You just have a lot of the isolated aspects of the culture that have existed because of the dynamics that existed during the transatlantic slave trade, and certain cultural aspects have been isolated within specific areas. But you'll see that Timbukata, um, uh, you, you know, uh, will provide a lot of the historical context and background that's missing in a lot of these traditions, because a lot of traditions don't teach the origin of some of these concepts. They don't really teach the origin of a lot of the structures that they have set as far as their pantheons and so forth. And in the traditions of Timbukata, this is something that we discuss and that we talk about as far as the historical aspect of where a lot of these structures uh, uh, have started.
Do people who practice this traditional medicine, Tim and Bukata, in Africa, do they have another spiritual system that they use in place of like a religion, or is this what they practice?
Timbukata is the traditional practice of the Dagombas out of the northern region of Ghana, but that is their traditional practice, Timbukata. But Timbukata is not a structured system in the sense that most people are familiar with Yoruba, Santeria, Kundumble, or anything of that nature. It's simply based off of the science of traditional medicine, meaning that it's based off of the science of herbology. It's based off the science of the natural resources of the land, and therefore, when you find a practitioner within these practices, each practitioner has their own unique way of dealing with spirit according to the knowledge that was passed down to them by their family line. Um, so it's very unique. You have really in the structure you have also these tindana, which a tindana, besides meaning one who collects the spiritual medicine or landlord, it means one who does the purifications for a particular landmass or particular area. So what it means is that that traditionalist, such as a tindana, such as myself, um, it means a person that does purifications or that does spiritual work for a large group of people. Um, and each tendana can be totally different. The structure of the type of spirits and the type of forces, the type of minds and mentalities that they deal with can be totally different.
And so we get the opportunity to own our spirituality.
I like that. I
Yes.
like
Yeah,
that.
owning spirituality based on the fact that having the knowledge behind what it is that you're doing, and then having the ability to be operative and to be self-sufficient. I think one of the largest complaints that a lot of us have faced is that a lot of people have been involved with a lot of traditional practices for years. However, basic components such as having the ability to do any type of diagnostic or any type of diagnosis to divine, having your own materials and spiritual tools and fetishes and shrines and so forth, and knowing how to work with them, knowing how to collect the medicine and so forth. These are all the things that most people that are within these traditions they don't get. They could be in there for 15 or 20 years and they still don't have basic fundamental knowledge on some of these things. So our goal here is to provide that type of knowledge so that people can become more self-sufficient. Our goal at IIKDS and the University of Traditional Sciences is to build leaders in the future of traditional spiritual care. That is the goal. Our goal is to provide to train practitioners so that they can become leaders in their community and they can provide spiritual care to their community. So that's the difference with our university. Our university is designed around developing practitioners, developing those that are interested in taking that knowledge and then using that knowledge in order to provide spiritual care in the community.
I love that. I love the fact that, the self-sufficiency. I love those little buzzwords: self-sufficient leaders, spiritual care technicians, if you would. I mean, I love that idea of self-sufficiency because, the dependency on people to give you information or to, or you have to run behind them in order to just, perform, I guess I'm just going to say basic things for yourself, to be self-sufficient. I think is really a good thing because a lot of people kind of like to dangle the carrot in front of you, so to speak. You know what I mean? It's like they're always telling you, giving you more, telling you that you're going to get more and more, and then each time you follow the little carrot, you get there, and you still can't do anything for yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's absolutely what I really really love about connecting with IKDS because I want to be able to have the ability to at least do some things for myself, not always going to the doctor for every little thing that I need. I can be my own self-care, take care of my own self in certain ways. So tell us about the trip to Africa.
Okay, so the trip to Africa right now is going to be at the end of September. We're going to give some dates, on that coming up soon. We're going to post the dates, but it's going to be at the end of September. And what we're designing is we're designing an apprenticeship program. So to kind of give you an example of some of the things that are going to happen, we're taking a group there, kind of give you like a basic aspect of the type itinerary, so what would happen here is that we're going to fly in to Ghana. We'll stay in Accra, which is the capital. We'll stay there for about one night, and then we're going to take a bus, what's called a chocho. We'll take that up to the northern regions of Ghana. Okay. Once we get there, we're going to provide a platform where everyone can meet and greet, their different host families and so forth. But then after that, different groups are going to be taken to different baga or different diviners, and this is done because we want to make sure that we go to different diviners to make sure that each individual person is paired with the right elder according to how they are designed themselves, according to their own star, according to their own spiritual makeup. So there's a period of investigations that will be done. Once the preliminary aspect of these investigations are done, and the different elders that exist in that area will pair these individuals with these elders, and there are several different rites of passage, different initiations, and so forth that these students are going to get. But our goal here is to equip the students with the spiritual tools, and with the equipment, and with the teachings and so forth that they need, so that when they come back home, they will actually have something in hand that they're able to use in order to help themselves, and even further to help the community if that's something that they're interested in doing. So our goal is to not only take a trip, and it's not just a sightseeing trip, it's a trip where our students are going to get trained in various aspects of the tradition, in addition to then becoming timbihis, or caretakers of the shrine. So they'll get different spiritual tools and fetishes and so forth that they're able to bring back, and that they're operatively able to use themselves, so they have some type of self-sufficiency as far as a practice of dealing with spirit, or developing themselves spiritually. So that's one of the things that we're doing at this trip here. I'll take you off mute. Okay. So, I think it's going to be a wonderful thing. I think a lot of people have gone over to Africa. They've got a chance to maybe get involved with some spiritual teachers or something like that. But our goal here is that when we're taking students to the northern regions of Ghana, is to train those students, and it's to get the proper tools, the proper spiritual equipment, fetishes, and so forth into their hands, so that they could come home and they'll have something that they can work with spiritually. Like I said, not only something to help themselves, but then even further, something that could put them on a level of a practitioner to a certain degree, where they're able to have tools and so forth that they could use in order to help themselves, in addition to helping people that may need help if they so choose. So,
How long is the trip going to last? How many days?
the goal is 2 weeks. The goal is 2 weeks. However, if a person can only come for a week, that's still possible. We just have to try and condense things into a small time frame, because the travel to get to this area is going to be at least 3.5 days in itself. 2 days in itself, just getting to the destination. So getting there and then getting back, that in itself is almost like 4 days just there. So the goal is about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So, what is the prerequisite to going to Africa on the trip?
The prerequisite is just the Dream Warriors course, and the Ancestral course. So the individual has to have taken at least one of those courses, and then they're eligible to go on the trip. We just want to have, the students to have some type of experience before they travel down, so that a lot of the concepts that are taught, are not foreign. Because one of the things that we want to do is that after we take the trip, a lot of the objects, a lot of the spiritual tools, a lot of the fetishes, the shrines, and so forth that the students are going to receive. The goal here is then for me to take them to a structured system of teaching them how to operate and how to function, all the procedural aspects of the shrines, the materials, and so forth, so that they can have a functional understanding of that. But some of these courses are mandatory, because some of the things that are being taught in these courses are going to be like fundamental things that one needs to understand and know as they're dealing with the spiritual components. They're newly developed spiritual components. So that's one of the reasons why we have these classes a prerequisite, because we want to make sure that people are up to par before they travel over and get involved in more of the advanced aspect of the tradition. Mm-hmm.
And I would definitely say that it's something that you have to experience. It's hard to you can explain to people, but until you actually experience, like me going through the Dream Warriors class, there were certain things that I experienced that nobody could have explained to me. And so I think that, and it doesn't take that long, and the classes are readily available, and they're totally, I mean, I would say that even for people who don't plan to go to Africa, that's one class that is worth taking. I mean, you can definitely take that class and really get something out of it to help enhance your life.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's definitely the goal. Yeah, that's definitely the goal. The goal is to provide authentic, indigenous knowledge. Um, that's rare and that's not really taught. Some of these concepts that are taught in the class, these are principles. It's not just part of a system, they're principles, so that when you understand some of these principles, you're then able to observe, you're able to create different types of structures based on the principles that you understand. So the goal here is to teach principles, and by teaching principles, it gives you a broader understanding of any tradition, because once you understand certain concepts, you understand how systems are developed from principles. So our goal here, like I said, is to teach principles. And principles are responsible for developing systems. So by understanding the principle, you're understanding the root, you're understanding the primary aspect of the tradition. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about nature identity and some of these concepts. With these concepts of nature identity, you're really able to understand the very foundation of all indigenous practices that deal with natural elements of nature, which we're calling nature identity. You're able to understand that, and that's the goal, to get that back in people's hands so that it doesn't matter where you're located geographically. Once you understand nature identity, you're someone that you can be in Alaska, you can be in Indonesia, you can be in Russia if you want, but you know how to look at the land, you know how to observe the land, and then you know how to create and develop or structure your practice accordingly. And the example I like to give to people so that they can really understand what I'm saying is, I ask a question all the time. I ask people, I say, well, listen, if during the transatlantic slave trade, brothers and sisters that came from Africa here to America, if the tradition was based just on the plant life, and the life forms that exist in West Africa, how is it that we're able to come to the States, and then practice our traditional perspectives? Especially if the landforms are different, the life form is different, the vegetation is different. So there has to be a structure of knowledge that exists beyond certain systematic approaches that we have, where, oh, you use this plant or use that. There has to be something that exists that's beyond that, and that's nature identity, where it's not necessarily specifically about one particular plant or one particular this. It's about the fundamental understanding of the land, understanding of ecology, an understanding of the integral nature of those things and how they play as far as the characteristics, the traits, and so forth that exist in life forms, whether they're the life forms that we know is the animal kingdom, or whether the life forms that are known throughout the human kingdom. And understanding how the different life forms that exist in ecology, and the land, how that interrelates, or how it's connected to the characteristics and the personality traits that exist within man. Because this is the interesting thing. Most of the concepts that are studied in behaviorism, that are studied in psychology, as far as dealing with the mind, or as far as dealing with personality traits and attributes and even behaviors, the traditional perspective, as I said before, sees these as things that emanate or that stem from the environment, from ecology, from the land. So what in essence that we're saying here is that through this knowledge, one is able to develop these characteristic traits of personality, any of these personality traits, or characteristics or attributes that are seen as personality traits, instincts, and so forth, that you see that exist in the various life forms that exist in ecology. So when you look at a particular landmass or landform, and you look at these dominant features and dominant life forms and so forth that exist in that, you understand that they're holding something that's very important. And this is what we look at it as far as we look at the Tindana, we see the different aspects of the gods that exist within the various aspects of life forms that exist within the environment.
And this makes a lot of sense because when I was young, um, everything was about outer space. God lives in heaven, and we're supposed to look at the stars in order to determine our personalities. And to finally be able to embrace the earth, it feels very natural, and it feels like something that I can touch, something that I can do. Whereas before, in our traditions and our older culture, the earth was demonized. It was
Right.
something that was supposed to pass away. It's something that was supposed to go away. But now it's like we have an opportunity as people of the earth to embrace the earth and to embrace the gifts that the earth has given us, and also to identify with the earth as children of the earth. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about this.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Even speaking on astrology, and those concepts, many of us have been stuck in these half truths. And what I mean by half truths is that we understand these truths and these realities from one perspective. So if we take astrology for instance, we've always looked at astrology as something that exists up there or that exists in the sky. However, we haven't observed the concept of as above, so below. As above, so below demonstrates that the same concepts that exist above in the quote unquote heavens or in the stars also exist here on the earth. So that means that any aspect of astrology that's been observed, it also exists as different components or attributes that exist on the earth. And I'm not and now watch what I just said here. One of the main aspects of what you're calling astrology deals with what? It deals with the movement of these different planetary bodies, and the movement of these planetary bodies then in turn influences the personality or the structure of humans' behavior. Now listen to that. Now what I was just telling you is that they say that exists in astrology. But what about the astrology that exists on the earth? And that is what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you is that same astrology exists here on this planet. And through understanding the aspects of geology, understanding the aspects of ecology and so forth, those various attributes that are found in those different aspects of astrology can actually be collected. It's literally as if you could collect the stars themselves.
Hmm.
Literally as you can collect the different realities and so forth as they exist on Earth. Because remember, as above, so below, or so below as above, so within, so without. So those same principles exist here. Because the truth of the matter is that even according to the lore of our ancient ancestors, there was a time, according to the Nabihi or the Inyaba, that the Earth's atmosphere was so thick that there was such a dense gaseous cloud that was in our atmosphere that the stars couldn't see the stars, that the concept of the heaven itself was right beneath the person's feet. So when it comes to astrology, when it comes to those type of things, is it's going to be important for people to understand that same type of concept, that same type of philosophy exists in its operative form through traditional medicine. It is the half of astrology that has been missing.
And that makes a lot of sense because I think that the stars are basically more like markers because they're light years away, and people don't even understand how many miles is a light year. So we're saying that these stars who are light years away are affecting us when really it's the earth that's affecting us, the earth that's under our feet. And what we're being affected by is determined by where the earth is moving or how the earth is moving as it relates to the markers. So we've been focused on the markers and we've not been focused on the active body that actually is affecting us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's a very good analogy. Exactly. That's exactly what's happened. And that's exactly the reason why it's going to be so important for people to understand the fundamental aspects of nature identity. Because then it's going to reacquaint people with the half of that puzzle that everyone's missing. Because people have been so focused on the absolutes, they've been so focused on the totality structure of holism that they have forgotten to understand the components and the parts that are responsible for the very structure and the mechanical movement and motion and action and life of the holism of the whole. So the goal here is to take some of the knowledge that most people understand in this absolute form, as it's been taught in many different esoteric philosophies and so forth, and then understand it from a fundamental uh, aspect starting from the earth on up, and that's something that's very powerful because uh, everything that exists above also exists below everything, and that's a basic concept that exists in a lot of different esoteric practices, but people don't understand how that exists in the aspects of traditional medicine. And I have to tell you, that's something that's unheard of. A lot of us spend so much time in developing ourselves in a lot of these different esoteric classes and so forth, but most people don't understand spiritual abilities, attributes, and so forth can all be cultivated and developed and gained through the knowledge of traditional medicine. That's always been the foundation and the core. It's been the primary of a lot of those different esoteric sciences. It's just people have gotten away from it and its understanding in its relative form. And because people have been misled, they've been given the information in its absolute form, which makes it so obscure because it's so far away and it's so disconnected from an individual where they stand on the relative aspect. There's a gap there, and they're not able to understand where the connection exists at, and then the connection exists at through first having a proper understanding of your own identity, and then your identity that exists in nature, and through that identity then you can move through a chain, and that you can make that connection that's necessary that a lot of us have been cut off from. Hmm.
I think I had a head start with listening to your podcast because a lot of this information I've kind of just been certain podcasts that I listen to more than once to try to understand exactly, just hearing the terms over and over again, Temibukata, Wunonam, and Nabihi, and things of that nature. These are new terms, and saying them over and over again is helpful for me because it helps me to become familiar with them. And the podcast and your website also help me to just kind of refresh my memory and refresh what's going on, just a review. And I think that could help people too to understand what we're talking about because it is a totally new concept for some people here.
No, it is. It is, and it's going to take time. But the goal is that this is why the university is here, and this is why we structured a lot of these educational programs, so that we could take people step by step, through this process, so that people are educated and they're educated well, and not just that, that they're self-sufficient, and that even further, that they're able to take this knowledge and even provide, care for themselves, spiritual care for themselves, and then even for their communities. So our goal is, number one is to build a new generation of traditional healers, in addition to providing spiritual care to support to the communities. So the way that we're doing that is that we're training individuals to become those practitioners that then can provide the spiritual care to the community, because a strong community is going to be important, and a system of health care or spiritual care is going to be necessary, especially in this day and time, because so many people have so many questions about spirituality, about their origin, about their bloodlines, about their own spiritual and even cultural identity. So it's going to be necessary to have people that are trained in these practices in order to be there, in order to help people and to provide spiritual care. So it can't be something that's just done by one person. It has to be something that's done by many people that are interested in developing themselves spiritually. So our goal is to provide that structured education and to develop leaders so that leaders can then provide care for their community. Yeah.
Chief Amachi, can you talk a little bit about like the importance of people connecting with their ancestors? Because I hear a lot of people who actually want to get into African spirituality. In the first place they look is, oh, they think it's primarily ancestral worship, and it's not ancestral worship. And I just find people who will look at other traditions and they will connect with ancestors through that tradition, and then attempt to practice African spirituality. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so and that's a very good point that you made up and that you brought up. I want to say that. And the first thing that I wanted to describe there with ancestral practices is that ancestral practices. So let me explain this. So one of the concepts that I was explaining before was called the Noliwuni. The Noliwuni is a person's star. That's what they call it. The English translation would be star, or another English translation would be a personal God. This Noliwuni or star is a spiritual representation of what you are, not necessarily as your individual personality, but actually the components of you that exists interiorly inside of you, but then also exteriorly in your exterior environment. So the best way to look at it is if like you spin a wheel, and if you were to spin a wheel, you would notice the spokes on that wheel will begin to slow down and almost begin to look stationary. Well, the Noliwuni or the star is very similar. So that means that there are components of you that are actually moving so fast that they're able to exist inside of you, but then they're also able to exist inside of the various aspects or components of nature. So when you look at a landscape or you look at an environment or ecosystem, according to traditional perspectives, we'll say that that environment or that landform or the landmass is actually moving so fast that it's able to occupy more than one space at a time, including the space within your being. So in dealing with the concepts of the ancestors, you have something where you have your own personal Noliwuni or star or personal God, but then also your family, and your family structure also has that same. They have similar Noliwunis that actually move through the bloodline. And what that means is that there are different aspects of nature or components of nature that exist within you, meaning parts of the environment, different land masses, different places such as plains, rivers, mountains, any type of natural environment that exists both in those seemingly seem stationary in those environments, but then also exist as components inside of you. And as I was saying before, just like we are talking about the astrology things, the various components of this that exist inside of you shape or form what most people are calling characteristics. So so there are characteristic traits or so forth that exist within your family, such as characteristics that most people call supernatural, or people have certain spiritual abilities. So what happens is that in traditionally we'll say that a family, not only does a person have a star, but a family has a star. And the caretakers of that star, or that Noliwuni or of that family's personal God is always displayed by supernatural abilities or psychic abilities and so forth. So that means that there are people in your family that are spiritually gifted. And according to our tradition, according to our perspectives, those people in essence are really caretakers or holders of specific characteristic traits and personalities from nature that are fixed in with the bloodline. So by dealing with ancestral practices, it has absolutely nothing to do with worship, But by dealing with ancestral practices, is actually is a system to where we're able to tap back in to the roots of the family tree. And by tying into the roots of the family tree, then we also can tie into the roots and the origin of the family's spiritual powers and spiritual abilities that then only manifests through specific family members that have specific traits. It even goes so far to say, according to tradition, you understand, even if a person were in the family, regardless of their beliefs or their tradition, if a person were to sit down and pray, what's really coming to help them are different aspects of the personal God that exists within their family line. It'll leave the caretaker and will travel to the person, can help them, and they can travel back and exist or rest with that person that is a caretaker of the Noli Wuni. So the ancestral practice has absolutely nothing to do with worship. It's actually a way of tying back into your family's strength, the family's characteristic traits, personalities, attributes, and so forth that give the family as a whole their spiritual power and their ability. The problem is that because people have been so disconnected, some people will only have very few people in their family that display these type of attributes. But then you also have other families where it's very prevalent, where lots of people in the family have certain abilities and so forth. So the goal is by dealing with your ancestral practices, your goal is to tie back into your natural abilities. Not only the natural abilities that exist with you personally, but the natural abilities that have rested and that have followed your family line. And thereby tying into that, then you even tie back into nature itself, because it is nature that is giving birth to these different aspects of personality traits and so forth. Just like we talked about in astrology, is according to the astrology perspective, it is the movement of these stars and so forth, and according to your particular time of birth, these qualities are then ingrained in you. But they never talk about that. This is all absolute. This is something that's way up here. We're talking about what's down here, and those same aspects are cultivated as well, and they exist as parts of a person's being. So our goal here through different ancestral practices is really to tie into the root of the tree. And as you tie into the root of the tree, then you tie back into the land. You tie back into the Wunonam. You then tie back into the minds and the mentalities that are responsible for creating many of the different aspects that we're dealing with now, whether you're dealing with them physically, spiritually, and so forth. And you're able to tie back in to a chain, mother to father, father to mother, great grandmother to great grandfather, all the way back to your original seed or star that's responsible for bringing many of the things that you are, as far as your family line, that ties you all the way back to nature itself. So the concept of ancestral practice really doesn't have anything to do with worship, unless we're talking about worshiping or developing one's own self, because you're actually identifying the different aspects of yourself, and you're asking those aspects to then step forward. But understanding that they exist in you in both ways, whether it be through your genetics or your blood, right? As contemporary science describes, through your blood, but then also existing, uh, in these spiritual realities. So the goal by calling on ancestors and connecting to that is to connect back to those particular powers that exist in your family, because everybody has it, and a lot of people have been able to see it. It's just that in this culture, we have not been able to identify what these abilities are, outside of the dynamics of just saying that, oh, they're just an individual's ability to have some type of extrasensory perception, or to have some type of different supernatural abilities. They're not able to identify the origin of these, where it comes from, how it's developed. And the traditions of Timbuktu are different indigenous communities that have been observing this type of phenomena for millions of years. So there's developed systems and an understanding of how these things are developed and how they're cultivated. So Uh, the ancestral component is very similar to, if I give you another analogy, if you look at the concept of instinct. So if you look at the concept of instincts when you're looking at animals, one of the things they'll tell you about instincts is they'll tell you that they are ingrained, repetitive, excuse me, repetitive. They're ingrained, repetitive patterns that exist in these animals, meaning that they're repetitive. There's something that's ingrained. There's something that's done without them thinking. Um, these same attributes, as far as instincts, spiritually also exist within family lines and so forth. And our ancestral practices are designed in order to access those innate abilities that exists within the bloodline. So I guess that's the best way that I can explain it now without talking about some things that may be inappropriate to talk about
Mm-hmm.
in this type of setting. But that's what ancestral practices are really about. It has absolutely nothing to do with worship. It has everything to do with self-development. And then, yeah, self-development. That's really what it should be known as, self-development. But no one would have a problem with it if you called it self-development, because that's what ancestral awareness is. It's a self-development phenomena. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with worship. People that have labeled it as worship and things of that nature, most of the time are either two things. There's someone that has a limited knowledge on the subject matter, or they're individuals that are trying to understand the cultural dynamics of something from an exterior perspective, meaning that you have groups of individuals that are trying to study information from an exterior perspective, meaning that they are not in the interior dynamics of what's being taught or done. So they're looking from the outside, and they're making assumptions and what they call educated guesses on what is being done in a lot of these circumstances. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we have been left with. We've been given, when it comes to tradition, far too many times we've been given these quote unquote educated guesses on what we have been practicing. We've been given educated guesses on what the ancient Egyptians or what these ancient Kemetic societies and so forth have been practicing, based on people that are from exterior cultures. So you look at someone like Cheikh Anta Diop's, who wrote about cultural invariance, and he explains that cultural invariance is a phenomena that exists. He said it's an impossibility for an exterior culture to observe the interior cultural dynamics of a culture and have a real psychological understanding of what's being done on the interior perspectives. It's impossible, meaning that it's impossible for someone outside of the circle to observe the circle and the interior of the circle and know exactly what the interior psychological dynamics are of that interior circle, especially if they're coming from an exterior perspective. In addition to an exterior cultural perspective, which is very interesting. So what I'm telling most people to understand, this is why when we look at things such as ancient Egypt, and we look at all these other things that we've been looking at, it's going to be important for us to then look at these things from the indigenous perspectives of people that still are part of the interior dynamics or interior structure of Africa. It's impossible to understand what's being done here by people that are from exterior cultures. So it would be impossible for someone that comes from the psychological dynamics of anywhere in Europe or Asia or so forth to tell you what the psychological dynamics were of people that are in Africa. A person from an exterior perspective may say, look on the wall here, they're holding a cup. That is purely based on their psychological dynamics and what they perceive to be a cup. To the people that are in the interior dynamics, it could be something totally different. And this is what I'm telling people: when it comes to traditional knowledge, we have to start understanding the perspectives of these things from our own perspectives, from the interior perspectives of Africans that are practicing the just traditional knowledge, and then some of the proper perspectives will come out. So so from that point on, we'll have a proper or clear understanding of what's being done with something as simple as ancestral practices. It's more about turning the switch on than actually worshiping, something. It's more about turning that switch on or that light on within yourself by recognizing who you are, not just who you are, but all the different components that make you. However, we don't have a problem with that when we study the same concept when we deal with genetics and we deal with the different aspects of understanding the genome and so forth. Then it becomes something that's, it's something that's prestigious.
Mhm.
But when we look at it from an aspect of our own cultural identity and understanding it through the perspectives of indigenous culture, then it's looked at something that's primitive.
Mm.
Even though I would like highlight that, in the Black Laws Dictionary, primitive or primary it means something that bears its own authority, and that cannot derive its authority from any outside source. So in fact, the concept of primitive is actually something that is a positive. It means that it's its own authority and that it doesn't establish its authority from any outside source. So our goal here then at the university is to provide authentic indigenous perspectives on tradition that have not necessarily been influenced as much by the exterior perspectives of others. And this is the reason why myself, and this is the reason why other elders and so forth that are part of the International Association of Traditional Scientists, this is the reason why it's so important to bring this information this way so that people can get it from that type of perspective. And when that's done, many of the things that I was describing before about some of the interrelated cultural dynamics that are in play with the Moors, the ancient Egyptians. So we'll understand this because this history is a history that's being held by a lot of these people. We just are not hearing this because we choose to take the opinions of people that are making educated guesses on
Mhm.
what some of these people were doing in their history. Right.
Chief, you actually have a question on Facebook.
Okay.
It's from Aida,
Okay.
and she wants to ask you what you know about East Africa and the Tigray people.
I don't. I don't. I don't know much about the Tigray people. This is the thing. Africa is so large. Let me give you an example so you understand something. You could fit all of the United States, all of Europe, half of South, half of Asia, South America, and Australia, all in Africa. You can fit all of the United States just in a small part of West Africa. That's how big it is. So Africa has a lot of different clans, has a lot of different families and tribes. So I wouldn't begin to know all of the different clans and groups that exist in those places.
There's also another question, Chief, that was being asked. And so when you spoke about the family star, the question was, how do you know, um, you know, I'm guessing, I'm just making sure that I understand. How do you know the caretaker is if you are of mixed heritage? So in other words, if you have two different, cultural, I guess, backgrounds that you're connected with, where would your, I guess your family's dominant star come from? If that's the way that I'm interpreting
Well,
English.
well, yeah,
Re-ask the
well, that
question.
okay. No worries. Well, that would be just it. That's just it. The family. So the dominant aspects of what a person is derived of would come from just that, the family. So regardless of how that family was structured, it would come from the family. So it wouldn't be about what side is it coming from. It will come from both sides. However, there are ways where we do traditional investigations, which I talked about, baga, which we are able to divine, and we're able to do different things in order to determine whether a person's star is more dominant on their mother's side or their father's side, or if they're carrying them personally, if they're carrying the dominant stars, whether it's coming from their mother's side or whether it's father's side. There's different investigations that can be done to determine that. Yeah, so
Okay, and so
yeah, that's done through like an investigation. However, I do want to make sure I'm clear. It really doesn't matter the dynamics of the family, whether the family is mixed or when it comes to the star, you're talking about the natural components of an individual. So it doesn't matter where they're coming from. They everyone has that, and according to the structure of the family, that will determine the structure of the stars that a person is carrying according to that family structure, regardless of how that structures created or put together.
okay, wonderful. And then there was another question that was regarding the trip to Africa, and that was what is the commitment that would be implied if one becomes a custodian to a particular, spirit. I think that there was something that you mentioned about that, and so the question was, what exactly does that mean, being a custodian?
Well,
What commitment?
that would really depend. That would really depend on the commitment. That would really depend on the the area of focus that a person is going to take up. So, um, I guess to give a good idea of that is that at the beginning the person becomes what we call a timbihi, which means a caretaker of the shrine, which means the person is just responsible for the upkeep of that particular shrine. As a person moves along further in their knowledge, those responsibilities change. Do you understand? So there's not just a blanket responsibility that a person has in tradition. The responsibility ultimately is just a person's sincerity, as far as being authentic and being sincere in the direction that they want to take. As far as becoming a traditionalist, that's really what a person needs to focus on. Individual commitments that are necessary for particular spirits really depends on what exactly the person is going to specialize in, and that's the best way to answer that, because there's not one type of blanket example I can give there. It really depend on what a person is studying, what they're learning, what type of spiritual power that they're interested in getting, and how they're trying to develop themselves spiritually. All those things would have to be taken into factor before I could answer a question like that.
Okay, okay, very good. All right, wonderful. We're coming up to the end of the second
Yeah,
hour.
sure.
So are there any further questions from the guests here? I am not seeing any more on Facebook here. So
Okay, well, I'm satisfied. If everyone else is satisfied, I guess this is our first broadcast here, so I'm gonna work on some things here in the future to kind of make it a little bit more attractive background. I have some medicine in the background, but we'll do something.
you want you
Yeah,
guys
that
to
was
answer
going to
the
be one of
question?
my questions. 'Cause I was wanting to know if that was like off limits to talk about.
Oh no, that's just different spiritual medicine.
Okay.
Different medicine. These are some spiritual things and stuff like that that I have. So that's just what some of those things are. So some of those things, I don't know how you can see them, but they're just some shrines and things that are there. So it's just something I have next to my couch. It's just a little something.
Can you speak to the garment that you have on, especially the headgear? I love headgear and stuff like that. So I'm just so fascinated with what the headgear that you have on is. That of significance?
Yes, actually, this was something that was created by my first teacher. His name was Apeto. And so this is a hat that he passed down to me. So that's all I can really say on that. It's just an heirloom that I was given by my first teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I am so excited that we were able to have this live broadcast and hopefully have many, many more. And so, Chief Machi, thank you so much for all the
You're
information.
welcome.
Thank you.
Th- Thank you
Thank you.
guys. Thank you
Thank you
guys
guys
for
for being on the panel.
yeah, thank you guys for being
Not
on
at
the panel.
all.
Thank you very much.
And so, have a good night. The recording is going to be made available in a short while once it's kind of recorded on YouTube there. And so, I look forward to having another conversation. We'll try to have these conversations, at least once or twice a month. And so, as we move further along with other things that are coming out with IKDS, then be sure that these are going to be more frequent. So, thanks everyone for joining us tonight on the broadcast, and have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Good
Bye
night,
bye.
everyone.
All right. Good night.